This is the Velvet Door, where beyond the door, we discuss all things that are worthy. Hurry up before it's too late.
Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. This once again is Shanjor, as you guys also may know me as SJ. And this is the Velvet Door, and we have a special guest. And once again, I seek out everybody that I want on my channel, everybody, because I see they do great things. They have brilliant voices, and I feel like they deserve their flowers and their platforms while they're here, right? So today we are having a conversation with our guest, Miss Windy Goodloe. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did. Thank you. And what do you prefer to be called? SJ?
SJ, you can call me Shanjor.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, or call me Shan, whichever, whichever works for me.
Yeah.
All right, so
very cool.
So Miss Windy Goodloe, Goodloe, she actually is the secretary for the Seminole Indian Scouts Cemetery. And one of the things I like to teach some people about, and it's something that I've learned on my journey of genealogy, is how important the burial grounds are. You know, a lot of times when we're looking for our ancestors, we're looking at birth certificates, we're looking at census records, we're looking at maybe just last known addresses, of course, oral stories. But one of the other places that you should always look at too is, where are your ancestors buried? The burial grounds and the death certificate records, like all these things, it kind of go together. So to see that Ms. Winley here and her team, they're actually doing what they do to preserve that. I think that's awesome and amazing, being that they are still finding like bodies and burial grounds that have been built on top of.
Exactly.
So I'm going to introduce you. Go ahead. I would love for you to tell us more about what you do there for the association. Tell us about what are the goals that you guys are trying to accomplish, and tell us, if you want, we'll get into about your Seminole history.
Oh, awesome. Okay. Well, yes, what we do with the Seminole Indian Scouts Cemetery Association is we preserve, promote, and maintain the cemetery, also known as the Seminole Indian Scouts Cemetery. It's located 3 miles outside of Brackettville. So when the Black Seminoles were stationed at Fort Clark from 1872 to 1914, they weren't buried in the fort when anybody passed away. Instead, a rancher donated land so that Black folks were allowed to be buried there. So that's basically why it was a segregated cemetery from the start. In the course of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts, that's what they were known as when they were scouting for the military. During their service, 4 men were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their bravery and courage, and they were buried at that cemetery. So all these years later, the cemetery is now a historic landmark because outside of Washington, D.C.'s Arlington Cemetery, our little town, our little cemetery has the most Congressional Medal of Honor recipients buried in one place. So, something that started out as, a way to keep people separated is now seen as an important landmark because it shows the bravery that these men displayed and the award that they were given for that bravery. So what our association does is make sure that the cemetery, it's very basic to, it has levels. So, on a very basic level, we just make sure that it's clean. That's, I think, the utmost thing that we do is make sure that it's presentable to anybody who might, come by, because it's open as a public cemetery. It has to be open 24 hours a day. And the interesting thing is I can go on the internet and find people who have just stumbled upon it or made a trip specifically to come see it. So you never know who's visiting. So that's the first thing, is just to make sure that it's clean. And then every year during Seminole Days, we gather to just pay reverence to those who have gone before us. I always say that our community is very elder focused. And then even when our elders become ancestors, we definitely don't forget them. So, the cemetery sort of is it's the centerpiece of my community, because for the longest time, the cemetery was really the only thing that we had. So
Right.
there was always a point of pride in it. So even though now we do own like other buildings that were historic to us, like the school building and things like that, the cemetery is still very important.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
That
so
was a
with
kind
the,
of long-winded answer.
oh no, we want the full. The reason why I say that is because I have a lot of people that I personally know that do have Seminole roots, and they've
Mhm.
never this cemetery. A lot
Yes.
of people don't think about the importance of the burial grounds and
Hmm.
finding your ancestors and what it means
Yeah.
to give thanks and proper, commemorance to what happened. So before we get further into about who you are, can you tell us
Hmm.
about the battle that did take place in
Hmm.
that part? And because I know Seminoles, their history does start, I believe, from Florida to Georgia,
Hmm.
that region right there. So how did it get to Texas now?
Okay, so yes, it is a trek. It is, you know, in my mind, whenever I speak about Black Seminole history, I say this is the story of America. If you just follow how they, you know, under most of the time under duress, traveled, they are an American story. They did not stop until they found a place that felt like home.
Right.
So, what we know is that a large majority of the people who were in the what we know as the Low Country region, who are also known as the Gullahs or Gullah Geechees, when they decided to liberate themselves from slavery, instead of going north, they went south into Florida because it was Spanish territory at the time. And then it would change to British and back to Spanish and then finally British. But, it was not a US territory. And they believed that the Gullahs were seeking freedom as early as 1689. So they were going in there. The Spanish were actually inviting groups in because they needed protection. So while Africans were running, or Gullahs as they were known, or Maroons as they would come to be known, were running into Florida for safety. Um, there were already, of course, indigenous folks there, but some of these groups had been completely decimated because of disease and other things. So a lot of early indigenous tribes were decimated and in very small numbers. So they essentially all kind of became one group. Um, while Gullahs were running into Florida, there was also a group of Creeks that were breaking away from their larger group of Creeks. They too ran into Florida. So there was a lot happening late 1600s into the early 1700s. By the time that the Second Seminole War came around, the two groups were pretty distinct. We then had the Seminoles and the Black Seminoles,
Right.
and they were fighting to maintain their place in Florida. There had been an earlier war known as the First Seminole War, um, led by Andrew Jackson, who would, of course, later become a US president. He is the only president, I believe, who said, I will kill a group of people if you elect me president. I will remove all of these people.
Right. Right. Right.
And,
Right.
I always just think that's crazy that people were like, yes, go completely obliterate a whole group of people.
Mhm.
So by the Second Seminole War, there were leaders among the groups that were emerging, especially among the Black Seminoles. We had John Horse, who was a very young man. He was of African and Seminole ancestry. So it was sort of like he's the perfect encapsulation of our people.
Mhm.
He was multilingual, so he was able to help negotiate, highly intelligent. So the Second Seminole War is known as the costliest war that America's even fought. Even if you put it in today's money versus the Vietnam War, it was still the most expensive war. So at one point, the US military was just like, how can we end this? So they sent General Jessup in to negotiate. And he didn't go negotiate with the Seminoles. He negotiated with the Black Seminoles. And he said, what do y'all want to stop fighting? And the Seminoles said, all we want is our freedom. If you can just guarantee our freedom, we'll stop fighting.
Right.
And so he said, okay, I promise you, if you move to Indian Territory in Oklahoma, you will have freedom. And of course, what do we know about promises?
Exactly.
So the Second Seminole War lasted from 1838 to 1842. And this saw the removal of the largest group of Seminoles and Black Seminoles. They think about 4,000 left Seminoles, 4,000 Seminoles, about 500 to 800 Black Seminoles. But of course, there was still a faction of Seminoles that stayed, and they fought until 1858, moving deeper and deeper into Florida. And this is the group that we know as the Florida Seminoles today. So there was a group that stayed, who fought, who actually maintained their land and took control of it. And what I love is if you go to their website, it says like, we never signed a treaty. So they are very proud people, and they have every right to be.
Wow.
So those are the Florida Seminoles, right? So the other group were shipped up the Rio Grande, up the I'm sorry, not the Rio Grande, the Gulf of Mexico. I'm in the wrong area. Gulf of Mexico, up the Mississippi River, up to Oklahoma, which had been established as Indian Territory. And when they got there, the government didn't care about any earlier rivalries or issues that they had. They just saw a bunch of people who identified as Native American and thought everybody gets along, or, they'll figure it out. So they placed the Seminoles and Black Seminoles right next to the Creeks, who at this point were not their friends. So from 1842 to 1849, the Seminoles and Black Seminoles were tortured by the Creeks because they were still upset with them for leaving the group. So their property was vandalized, and the Black Seminoles were always in danger of being stolen into slavery. So John Horace, who was still the leader at this time,
Right.
was trying to figure out a solution. He even went to Washington to ask for help, but didn't get it. So he and Wildcat, who was the leader of the Seminoles at that time, another young man. And I really think that if it hadn't been for these two young people, young men, if it hadn't been for their tenacity, their ambition, this story probably wouldn't have happened this way. But they learned about Mexico needing help protecting their border from the Texans that were encroaching, and what they termed hostile, which I never liked that word, but that's what official documents say, hostile Native Americans. So Wildcat and John Horace gathered up a group of Seminoles and Black Seminoles. Again, the Seminoles were always the larger group, Black Seminoles the smaller group, and they trekked 700 miles from Oklahoma through Texas into northern Mexico, and presented themselves to the Mexican government in July, I believe, of 1850. So it took them the whole year of 1849, to trek across Texas. And they would go on to work for the Mexican government as scouts for 20 years. So from 1850 to 1870, they worked as scouts. And Mexico actually is the only government that has kept their promise to the Black Seminoles in particular. There's still a little town there where the Black Seminoles still live. They're known there as Negros Mascogos. And the name of the town is El Nacimiento de los Negros Mascogos. So in the northern part of Mexico, there is a city that is testament to a government's promises being kept. So following the end of the Civil War in 1865 for Texas, right, because we learned about our emancipation 2 years after everybody else, the government went to the Black Seminoles. And let me back up a little. So Wildcat actually died while they were there, very young, of I believe intestinal issues or malaria. I might have the sickness wrong, but when he passed away, the Seminoles that were there left and went back to Oklahoma, because even though John Horace was the leader of the Black Seminoles, they would not follow the lead of a Black Seminole. So they left when their leader died. So 1865, Civil War is over. the US military approaches the Black Seminoles and says, hey, what you're doing for Mexico, why don't you come over here and do it for us? And because several of them did want to come back to what they considered home, the United States, they took the US military up on their offer. They believed that they would be rewarded greater than what the Mexican government had. So they thought they would get, more money, provisions, more land. So on July 4th, which I always think is such an interesting date, July 4th, 1870, the first group of 10 men crossed over, and they were mustered into service in Eagle Pass at Fort Duncan on August 16th, 1870. And then 2 years later, they moved to Brackettville. So they would go on to serve until 1914. And in that time, they fought 12 significant battles, mostly against Comanche, the Apache. One particular battle was when 3 of the Black Seminoles were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their bravery. They actually saved their lieutenant, John Bullis, from being killed, ambushed, captured by a group. They were able to get away, and they looked back and saw that he was being overtaken. So they turned around and went and got him. And in his letter, he wrote that they didn't have to save him, but they did. So that's why they received the medal for saving their commander. So we highlight these battles and the military history and just all the exploits that these men did, because what they did was amazing. They never lost a man in battle in all their time in the military. And most of the men, it was a family affair. It wasn't just, a father. It would be a father, a son, an uncle, a cousin. So yeah, that's why, our history is so important to us, because of all the moving that the Black Seminoles did until they found, there's a book that I love, actually, it's right here. It's called Our Land Before We Die. I think I take this with me everywhere I go. If I just, it's a heavy read, but I feel like it's almost like my security blanket in a lot of ways,
Really?
because yeah,
Tell us.
it was written by a gentleman named Jeff Gwynne, and the way that he writes the book is beautiful, because he lets our two, and I love the word griot. So he lets our two griots, Miss Charles Emily Wilson and Mr. Dub Warrior, tell our story. Like, he kind of gets out of their way. He just kind of sets up a question and then lets them talk. And, they're both our ancestors now. Miss Charles died, I believe, in 2006 at the age of 94. Mr. Warrior died in 2021. So, I grew up with them. So I don't ever want to lose the sound of their voice, the older I get. So having this book now to me is just so poignant, because they tell, oh yeah, they tell our story. Do you see it?
Pull it back a little bit.
Okay.
Our Land Before We Die. I love it.
Yes. Okay. So I always tell people, if you want to learn about our history, start with that book, because it's again, it's weird to say it's an easy read, but it is, because it's so accessible. And the way that Jeff Gwynne frames the story, the way he allows, our Miss Wilson and Mr. Warrior to just tell the story, I think is just a masterful move in storytelling. So yeah, I always recommend that book if someone wants to just kind of get their feet wet with our history.
Okay, well, let's go back a little bit.
Sure.
Because we talked about the battle, Mexico, how Mexico did uphold the promises made to the Seminoles, right? Let's go back. So when we're talking about a Seminole, what is a Seminole Indian? Because I've heard stories about what it means to be a Cherokee, and a lot of times it's smaller tribes that are merging into being what we now call Cherokee. So you and your understanding, what does it mean to be a Seminole?
Very much the same thing. I don't know this, so I hope I'm not saying anything wrong, but I feel like the Seminoles were one of the last sort of Native American tribes to form,
Okay.
because it was sort of, they came together in like the late 1850s, I'm sorry, 1840s. During that Second Seminole War was when they really were kind of like, okay, this is who they are. But yeah, it's believed that they were a mixing of several Native American tribes like the Yamasee, the Hitchiti, Miccosukee, and
Mhm.
they were lumped together, not of their, they weren't the ones who called themselves Seminole. It
Okay.
was other folks who called themselves Seminole, because actually the word Seminole is believed to be a Creek or a Muskogee word that means runaway. So, that kind of shows you the tension that was there. If that's what they were calling them, was runaway. And they also believe that it might have been from a Spanish word, cimarron or cimarron, for wild. And that's more where the word maroon came from. It was definitely from that Spanish word. So it's interesting that the Seminole and Black Seminole both were described as sort of runaways, you know, people who were kind of seeking their own outside
Right.
of, yeah.
So for the American Indians that were run away, um, what would they run away from though? For them to become a
Mhm.
Seminole or Maroon,
So, so
right?
the it's believed that the largest group to make up the Seminoles were the Creeks,
Mhm.
and they were separating from their group because there were moral differences that they had that they just didn't want to stay around anymore.
Right.
Um, so it's believed that there were two groups. It was the Upper Creeks and the Lower Creeks.
Hmm.
The Upper Creeks wanted to get away from the Lower Creeks because the Lower Creeks were deciding to practice a more chattel enslavement.
Mm,
And, within the Seminoles that went into Florida, there was slavery, but um, it's believed that it was mostly the chiefs who enslaved people.
mm,
And if there was any form of slavery, and it still feels weird talking about it because to me, slavery is slavery. But if there was any form of slavery, they believed it was more like a feudal taxation where you know, you're on my land or you're using my land. So give me sort of like sharecropping, give me a certain
right,
percentage of your crop or give
right,
me a certain percentage of your livestock. So,
right.
so their enslavement had many different forms.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to understand that, because if I'm a Seminole descendant and I'm asking these questions for people that
Hmm.
want to know more about what a
Hmm.
Seminole, and to specify it again, you said that the Seminoles actually formed in the late 1800s, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so it's an amalgamation of these different tribal identities.
Yes.
Now, for the Africans, though, because now that we kind of got out the way with
Hmm.
that of it, for the Africans, what is the story of the Africans? Their arrival, how did they become a part of that, and from what part of the world or what part of Africa are these particular people from?
Oh, wow. Great question. So actually, I just spent this past weekend in Beaufort, South Carolina.
Hmm.
There was a symposium there called Four Gullah Sierra Leonean Homecomings. So that should
Right.
give you a clue right there. It's believed that, most of the enslaved Africans who ended up on what's considered the low country region of the United States came from West Africa.
Okay.
And during the symposium, there was a speaker that said that they believed the majority of these people came from Sierra Leone in particular. I think something that's really interesting is that when I was learning about slavery in school,
Mhm.
we thought they just went and got everybody. But in actuality, um, there were six countries in Africa that were targeted because the people there were rice growers. And Sierra Leone is one of those rice growing countries. So people were targeted for their ability to grow rice. These were, engineers essentially of farming. So these were the people that were going to create society in Sierra Leone who were being stolen over here to help make these white enslavers very rich. And what's interesting is they figured out a way to because you can't grow rice in salt water, from my understanding. So they figured out a way to sort of filter the water in order to make the rice grow. So, it's amazing. Um, so the folks who were in this low country region would become known as the Gullah or Gullah Geechee. And what was interesting was there were periods of time when they were in complete isolation. So they had the ability to create their own language. They were able to um, hone some of their skills. They're known for things like basket weaving, which is a direct craft that can be traced back to Sierra Leone. Um, their music, you know. So all of these things were carried with them into Florida when some of them escaped, because they took their rice growing with them.
Right.
They definitely took their language with them. And they took their songs, because those are things that we have where I'm at in Texas and in Mexico. We're trying now to revitalize the language that they spoke, which is known as Afro-Seminole Creole. But it has a direct link to Gullah. So, we definitely know that those are our forebears in the Low Country region, because our language is so, so similar.
Right, right. I know that for Low Countries too. I have ancestry to Low Country as well.
Hmm.
Um, so my hold on, let me get it together. My it's my second great grandma
Hmm.
and mother
Oh, wow. Okay.
were from St. Stephen's
Oh, wow.
Parish, and that is literally, I think it's about like maybe 20-30 minutes outside of Charleston.
Wow. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah,
such a beautiful area.
yeah.
Such a beautiful area.
So that's where so when that side of the family came up from the Carolinas, of course, they
Hmm.
to New York. Um,
Oh, wow.
yeah, their migration patterns really on that side. It's like they're in North Carolina, then South Carolina, then North Carolina. They
Hmm.
were like down and down and down,
Back and forth. Yeah.
right? Right? And there used to be treks that people would take go back and forth at one point. So
Wow.
and I also have another ancestor, and they were in Goose Creek,
Okay. I
um,
haven't heard of Goose Creek in South Carolina.
South Carolina. Yeah. So
Okay.
okay, so you never heard of Goose Creek. Have you ever heard of
No,
the Creek Men and their contributions to Low Country?
no, the Goose Creek Men.
Mhm. Okay,
No,
so
I'm
the
gonna look that up. Yeah. Are you gonna
yeah,
tell me?
I got you.
Okay, cool.
Goose Creek Men, and the way how I learned this story was through my own family, because my
Hmm.
father's side of the family, they're from Barbados. My
Oh,
mother,
amazing.
right. So
Yeah.
my dad was telling me, he was like, he visited South Carolina. And before he visited, he actually will call because he worked at a company when he was here.
Hmm.
Call like to certain businesses down there, and he would see certain last names. And he's like,
Um,
And like these last names are very popular in Barbados. So
okay.
like trying to figure out, because if you're from like certain parts of the world and you start seeing certain things that's familiar from your home,
You're
you
like, what's going on? Yeah.
like, are these my people or are they not my people?
Yeah.
You know? So he started doing his little research, and then he actually told me, he was like, I think there are people down in that area that are from Barbados. And
Hmm.
so I actually started doing my research, right? Because I'm
Hmm.
already kind of on the path as a researcher, historian, things like that, and definitely wanted to know more about my Caribbean
Yeah,
ancestry.
your family. Yeah.
And then that's when I did find out that there was a
Wow.
between Charleston, South Carolina, and Barbados. So what happened was there was a group of men. They were called the Goose Creek Men, and
Hmm.
they missioned out of Barbados to come to Charleston to pretty much colonize. Call it this place plain and simple, colonize.
Yeah.
In fact, if you look at the way how they built Charleston, it's
Hmm.
very similar to how they built Bridgetown, Barbados. Like the architecture,
Wow.
color of the buildings,
Uh-huh.
it's like you could tell it's the same to the people that built it. So when you look at Goose Creek area, a lot of the small towns in that area was established by these Goose Creek men. And they actually initiated an illegal Indian slave trade business in that
Mm,
area too. They actually were trying to fight against the other colonies because they wanted to establish their own means of economics in that area
yeah.
based off of the plantations. Um,
Hmm.
and you also can't forget they had, like you said, they had the rice down there, the
Yeah.
the indigo fields, right?
Yeah.
They had all these things in that area.
Yes.
They were definitely trying to monetize the Sea Islands and all these different areas and enslaving people and bringing people in as labor. So
Hmm.
what you find also, I've noticed with the Gullah or Geechee people, is that the dialects, like
Yeah.
you said you find the Sierra Leone connection. For me,
Hmm.
I definitely can hear the Caribbean connection because
Yeah. You hear it in their voice. It's like they're singing.
I recently met a lady, not too far from where I'm at. I met a
Hmm.
lady at a reception. She's a receptionist, and
Uh-huh.
talking, and I'm like, her accent was. I'm like, wait, this lady she's not a Jamaican, right? I'm like, she
Uh-huh.
a Bayesian accent is very unique. It has a very unique twang to it.
Uh-huh.
Lady sounds Bayesian. And I asked her, I said, let me just ask her. Because I know me, I'm an ask. So I'm like,
Yes.
you know, you know, you got an accent. Where you from? You mind me asking, like, where you from?
Hmm.
And she was like, oh, I'm from Beaufort, South Carolina. And I was like,
Wow.
oh. She was like, yeah. She's like, yeah, they had an accent going.
Yeah.
I was like, well, you sound very similar to my grandma. She
Hmm.
and she was like, oh, you really? And I said,
Aw.
yeah, you do. You sound like her.
That's
And
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, and then she was saying how well, she was a part of one of the great migrations that came up. So she came up, I think she said like the 70s or 60s or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so it was so like the connections. Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
interesting.
there's so many connections. And, I think the thing is what I've learned is
Hmm.
I can't be so rigid about anything. I
Right,
um I think I've been saying this for like the better part of a decade now that history is so gray. It's not black, it's not white, it's gray. And we have to be comfortable in that because that then allows us to go and meet somebody who speaks and then
hmm,
have the courage to ask them, where is that accent from? Because you want to know, because you already have this, from your research, from your familial, understanding, this proves what you already know. So that's what I'm learning. It's just,
ex. And you know what? That's
yeah.
the thing. Like I've actually personally met people who
Hmm.
like their third great grandfather was actually from Barbados. Like
Wow.
a lot of them do have recollection of having this Caribbean ancestry, but I
Yeah.
would people might not understand why that happened or what transpired for that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like if you're in Louisiana, there's some people that have that French connection. There's some
Yeah,
people
exactly.
that may even find out they have a Haitian connection because
Yeah.
literally the French connection. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
It's not far fetched. And that's what I do. I like to help people understand that a lot of times we have differences, and I think we should always respect our boundaries and differences. But I think
Hmm.
so highlight and also and admire our similarities too, because you find
Yeah,
we're probably crossing paths. We
exactly.
might be cousins, you know what I mean?
I would not be upset if I found out that we were related. Yeah, and I agree. I think, you know, um, I don't think most people think this anymore, but I remember growing up and thinking that there wasn't much to Black culture. Like we felt like we had been robbed in a lot of
Right,
ways because we didn't have like an African, you know, connection.
right.
But of course now that's like completely not true. But I think what I'm learning is that there's so much culture within a culture. You know, you could spend forever just learning about the food of a people. You
Yeah.
know, you could spend forever learning about the music of a people. I feel like it's overwhelming to think about, but it's also a beautiful thing because these connections just get deeper and deeper the more that if you allow the space to just learn. There's so much to learn about just even one little space about a people. So yeah, that's what I love about all of this.
And that's what we have to do is provide space for growth.
Yeah.
Because like literally, I literally just learned about, and this was by accident. I'm
Mhm.
like, all this stuff. I'm like, oh man, I didn't know about that. So I heard about the Barbadian slaves who came to Long Island. It was an
Long
island,
Island.
Shelter Island. That's right here in it's up in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was an island called Shelter Island, and there were some Bayesian slaves that were brought here by Bayesian plantation owners, and
Mhm.
had some type of deed or commission to have ownership on this particular landmass for Shelter
Wow.
Island. They came here in what 1600s.
Mhm.
Now I'm born and raised in New York. Okay, I went through the public school system. I've never been taught.
Yeah, and there's so much where you're like, why did I not know this? Of course, I realize you should keep learning as an adult. You should continue learning. But yeah, there are so many little things that if I had learned them at an earlier age, I think it might have made a difference in a lot of like
Yes.
confidence, like the idea about the rice. That really just wow, they weren't just stealing people, they were targeting people. It's different to kind of look at it
Well,
that way.
but,
I mean, they were still enslaved, but
but
it's a
and
difference.
so because if you're trying to capitalize on a certain crop or product,
Hmm.
you need to find the people that are going to monopolize or make that
Yeah,
product what it is. Right.
help you make money and save you money by, knowing how to do it, not having to train them. So yeah, but yeah,
Right.
I just wish I had learned that earlier.
But like you said, there's a lot of gray areas because, to be honest, a lot of us we get our information and our understandings of history sometimes through media and entertainment.
Hmm. Hmm.
Entertainment is really just that, is
I
entertainment.
know,
And
I know.
really get the grasp that no, they were stealing carpenters, blacksmiths, they were stealing seamstress, they were
Yeah.
selling off people that knew how to heal.
Yes.
All these people, everybody had
Had
a
a
reason.
skill. Yeah.
Exactly. These were not just random people. Like, and I tell people, I'm like, so what you thought that you mean to tell me you thought a European was teaching a slave, how to make some fried chicken? Like, come on, like, no, they can't even make it themselves. So these people,
Exactly.
they already had understandings of how to prepare food, how to survive, and how to
Yes.
environments. They knew that already. So let's get into your background a little bit
Okay.
about what roots to are you a Seminole and do you have
Mhm.
indigenous roots? What's your story?
So my Black Seminole, well, I should say I'm Black Seminole on my mom's side, maternally. Um, so my yeah, basically everyone in Brackett, where I live, who is a Black Seminole, is
Mm-hmm.
able to trace their ancestry to the muster rolls that were
Mm-hmm.
part of the military records for the men. There were 154 men total who served as scouts. So in my family, we definitely have two scouts, Joe Remo and Joseph Phillips, who served as scouts, meaning they came over and served here in Brackett. So when they were disbanded in 1914, my family just stayed in Bracketville. Some folks went back to Mexico. Other people went to other areas. Like, 30 minutes away from us is a place called Del Rio, which is 2 miles from the Mexican border. So, you know, my family did not move to what we call the big city. We stayed in small Bracketville. But as far as I've been able to trace my ancestry back, I do know that one of my great great grandmothers was from Mexico, but I don't think she was born there. I think she had moved there. Like, so I'm not sure if she,
Okay.
came from Oklahoma. But yeah, so that's basically how I know about my Black Seminole. Um, well, I am a Black Seminole, but how I know about my being a descendant about this of the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts is that I can look and see my ancestor right there on the roll. I had heard his name forever, both of them, my grandmother and grandfather on my mom's side, and on my paternal side, my dad is from the Congo. So, you know, I know about Africa, of course, because of him. So he's from Kinshasa, Congo, or DRC.
Out of your family, you are like first generation from the.
Yes. Yeah. So he immigrated in 1976.
Oh,
So, yeah. Yeah. And he lives in North Carolina now, interestingly.
okay. Oh, North
Yeah.
Carolina.
Yeah.
So do you feel that sometimes when you are focusing on your American history,
Hmm.
what you say in Black Seminole, do you feel that it sometimes you feel that people may feel make you feel that you're neglecting your African history at the same time frame, or do you find
Hmm.
you're balancing the two, equally? Because and I'm asking
That's a
that
good question. Yeah.
yeah, because I asked that because I've had people like, they'll feel that if you have another ancestry, but yet
Hmm.
say you're born and raised in America, right? And you're
Yeah.
focusing on where you're born and raised at, because you're like, hey, I'm born and raised in this culture. This is my
Yeah.
culture. But then other people may feel like now you're neglecting another side of you. Do you ever feel that way when it comes to your what your intent
Um,
is?
hmm. I think, because I was raised with my mom's family, that
Hmm.
was what I knew. So I knew celebrating Juneteenth and Seminole Days. Um, when I got older and learned more about my dad's, that he was actually from Africa and things like that, I did take it upon myself to learn more about what it meant to be Congolese.
Right,
I really do think it just sort of depends on, where you are in life.
right.
Because even as a Black Seminole, I definitely, um, and I think it's just me personally, but I do think it is important to understand what it meant to be a Maroon, a Black person who is finding their own freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I've always been interested in that aspect of the Black and the Seminole. Um, just because sometimes I felt like the African was being left out in what I was reading.
Hmm.
When I started doing my research, it did seem that Seminole was more emphasized than the Black. Um, but now I think there is more of a balance. I think I don't think you can ever really balance anything. I think something will always get a little bit more play. Um, but I think right now where we're at with, how we present ourselves as a group, I think we are leaving space to insert more culture from each,
Right.
because, the thing is that as Black Seminoles, we are not what people would think of as traditional Native Americans. We don't have teepees, we
Hmm.
don't have powwows.
Right.
Um, so a lot of what people expect to see if they see a Black Seminole, they might be disappointed because we're not, the Hollywood version of it. And I think if you ask most Native Americans, they are not the Hollywood version of, how their
Right.
group has been presented. And that's not, that's so unfair to me that, there's this weird standard that you have to live up to, even though you're living in your body as this, you shouldn't have to prove through, you know,
Right.
something who
But
you are.
that you have to sometimes overcompensate because, like,
No,
no.
yeah, I think, um, yeah, I don't think I've ever had felt the feeling of having to overcompensate because I think the way that I was raised,
Hmm.
I sort of always knew who I was. So it wasn't like I discovered anything. So everybody around me was already Black Seminole, and we were
Hmm.
already just living and breathing. Um, the only thing I think I would have to say that there is an example of that where I felt like I need to overcompensate was with our language because we're literally revitalizing it right now. And there are people who have come and have said, speak some ASC. And I'm like, well, the reason I can't speak it is because you told my uncles, my
Right.
oldest uncle, that it wasn't proper English. So that caused a ripple effect through my
Right.
family. And my mom, who's the baby girl, she doesn't even have she didn't even get a chance to learn it. So, and now it's, oh, well, you need to speak it. We're trying to learn now after realizing that it's something that's very important to us. I would say that's really the only thing. Everything else, I think, no, I've never felt the need to compensate anything because we just are, just by breathing, we are Black Seminole, you know. Um, yeah, I don't think, I don't know, I can't speak for anybody else, but I know personally I've never felt like,
Yeah.
that I need to do anything more.
Well, I asked that question because you do have people that have feel that they were robbed of their indigenous experience.
Oh yeah, and I definitely understand that. But again, I think, you have to come to bracket sometime. We're such a small, small, small community. And of course, more and more people have moved away.
Mhm.
Um, but I think because we're so insulated and
Mhm.
isolated and we all know each other,
Right.
it's not even about like, we don't look at each other and say, we're Black Seminole. We don't, but
Right.
we know each other because we've all gone back generation after generation after generation. And there's a comfort there, knowing
Right.
that sort of we're all in this together. Um, so yeah, I think for me, that's been, I'm lucky in that way, you know?
So, so when you're dealing with because we're gonna move into because right now we're dealing with identity and
Hmm.
what it be Black,
Hmm.
Indigenous, what it looks like
Yeah. And
now.
it doesn't look like what people expect, but that's okay.
So, so I have to ask the question then.
Hmm.
Being that there are those of us that have been robbed of their indigenous experience,
Hmm.
quite a bit of us have always been Black, always.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe in more recent times or later in life, you start to understand what it meant, or you start to have, I guess, the confidence to come out as indigenous
Yeah.
or as a native, however you want to
Yeah.
pronounce that to your own liking. But um, I think it's a tough place to be in, and I noticed that because going around people who are
Mhm.
in their tribes, and
Mhm.
their reality, it's like totally different. They live
Yeah.
in a different realm than those of us that are not in tribes, but we are
Mhm.
multi-tribal. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so when we're trying to convey, what it's like to back into a paradigm that we feel like our ancestors were robbed from because they had to
Mhm.
assimilate, like you said,
Exactly.
their languages. They had to even sometimes change their names. They had
Yes.
um, change or hide the things they wanted to wear. I mean, at one point, it was really a joke, a matter to say, "Oh, you have some Indian in you."
I
People were
know. And that was, yeah, but it was true.
right, and it was true, and it was like, well, why not be true? This is a big country, and I think people
Mhm.
forget how big this country is, and I think people forget that hello, mixing and mingling is going to happen, but just to go to the next topic though,
Mhm.
back to Texas though, because I
Yeah.
understand this. Your family and a lot of the families that are of Seminole roots, would you
Mhm.
say they were coming out of the 13 colonies, right?
Coming out of the 13 colonies.
Yeah, like so they were migrating west. Hmm.
Well, the majority of the folks that were in Nacimiento were Black Seminole, meaning they, you know, yeah, the 13 colonies would have been forming at that time. So yeah, you're right. Had come, but had gone into Florida and, you
Right.
know, yeah,
I
okay.
is what I'm noticing that when people are doing a genealogy, especially if they're from like the deep south, like Mississippi,
Mhm.
Louisiana, some people, a lot of them are really finding out that their families actually migrated from the coastal states,
Yeah.
and they migrated into these areas now. So you may have been there for, let's say, for like 3, 4 generations, but
Yeah.
when you get to a certain part of your genealogy, you might actually find that they actually were coming out of maybe Virginia. I know Virginia is a very big hub for
Yeah.
people. They have a Virginia connection, and then they
Hmm.
through, or let's say if you do have a European connection, or any other ancestry connection, one of the things that people have to look for is the shipping ports. So like where
Yeah.
people were coming into,
Where were they coming from? Yeah. Wow.
arriving on random locations. Oh, they were actually ports that people were coming into. And a lot of
Yeah.
times ports were on the coastal lines, of course, meaning
Exactly. And then they would
oh,
be moved inland.
and
Yeah.
then right. So that's just
Yeah.
something to kind of remind certain people about,
Well, what I would say is, when the Black Seminoles got to Mexico, there were Black folks there already, so,
right.
um, and their, Mexico abolished slavery around 1829.
Okay.
So it had always been a safe haven for Black people, especially
Right.
anyone in the Texas region, before Texas became a state.
Right.
There were folks that were, going, well, even when it became a state, there was still slavery. But they were finding people that were going there. And there were some people on our muster roll who did not have Native American in them
Right.
and were still put into the group as Black Seminoles. So, they were there before or came after and still were part of the group.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
For the people that were not of Seminole roots, were they
Mhm.
just allies to the cause? Like, how did they get punched up into that group?
Yeah, once they joined the military, because there was one gentleman in particular, I
Mhm.
can't think of his name right now, but in the muster rolls, what's really interesting are the enlistment records. They classified people by skin color. Have you ever seen enlistment records before
Yeah, I
from the
have.
military where they'll say, dark or black for, people
Sometimes
that
they
appear Black?
put a bodybuilder, put like stout or like blood.
Yeah.
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the one that we have, they actually have height. So like everybody was so short, they were like 5'6" and stuff. But there
You know,
was one
they were really
person.
short, and they were really, because I'm short. I'm like, it makes sense. I was short.
But yeah, there was one gentleman who he wasn't white enough to be in the regular, army. So they lumped him in with the Black Seminoles, and he was described as copper. They couldn't think of another word for him because they were either Black, brown, or copper was the only. And it turned out he was, in his enlistment records, it said that he was German and biracial. So he was from Germany and biracial. How he got here, I don't know. That's probably something I need to sit down and figure out. But
Mhm.
yeah, they didn't have another place for him, so they put him in with the Black Seminoles. And we have several people who are definitely Mexican who were lumped in as well. But we accept all their families now today as Black Seminoles. If you're on the list, you're Black Seminole. If you are from Nacimiento, you're Black Seminole.
Like,
So,
but that I think that's awesome, because I think what people forget is, like, I have to like tell people, like, do you guys know that Mexico is on the same continent as us? And that you might find that there are some people on certain sides of the country that are going to look like us that may have
mhm.
roots, and
Oh yeah.
not a big deal. Like, I think one of the most popular ones that I know, you ever heard of the girl Jada Waiter? Jada
Is she
Waiter.
the singer?
No, she's Little Babies, the rappers, baby
Uh-huh.
mama. But
No.
I don't, for those watching, they may know who Jada Waiter is, but I know
Yeah.
she's actually said publicly that her grandmother is Mexican. You
Yeah.
know, she's about my complexion a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah, like, is she identifies as Black today, but that's her choice, but she
Yeah.
is of Mexican descent. So
Exactly.
it's not far-fetched, and I'm like, this is North America. We all connected at some point.
Yeah. And if there were safe havens, people were going there if they could get there, you know.
Right,
So
exactly.
it's definitely not.
Wow.
Yeah, it's definitely not strange to think that, your
Right.
ancestors might have gone into Mexico because it was safe, stayed there, and then like the um the Black Seminoles did when it was considered safe, I guess, come back over.
Some people even went to Canada, you
Of
know.
course, there were a lot of people that
Yeah,
went to Canada.
yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people
Yeah.
Nova Scotia, Acadia. Yeah, it was around.
Yes, yeah, there's a Black Seminole descendant who traces his family's roots to Nova Scotia. That's a whole beautiful story. Well,
Mhm.
he does talk about the, difficulties that they had, but still it's a beautiful story that they went that far.
That's right.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's like I said, it's a beautiful story when you, and I guess it's beautiful now because now we
Hmm.
back and we can say, oh wow, look, you guys were going here,
Yeah.
here. But you know, there were definitely different reasons why people were migrating around. And like you said, a lot of times it was for safety. A lot of times
Yeah.
it was just trying to make sure that they don't get caught up in any kind of laws and different taxations and
Oh yeah.
things. So so I asked you this question too. Then let's get a little political a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think about what do you think about like reparations and things like that? Is that something that, as a Black Seminole, that is something that like you guys are advocating for? Because I know that when you have other groups out here that
Hmm.
are for Black Americans
Hmm.
are pushing for reparations, they are pushing
Hmm.
for some type of financial repair compensation, and even
Yeah.
certain programs to repair families that have been unfortunately targeted.
Hmm.
So that a
Yeah.
great land theft has occurred.
Yes, especially
Um,
in the Low Country region. I saw it, just this weekend.
oh,
All the
really?
development that's happening, you
Yeah. What?
know, um, families are being bought off
Mm,
for what they think is good money. And then these resorts are coming in, golf courses are coming in, especially in Hilton Head. I had been to Hilton Head years ago, um,
mm,
and it hasn't stopped. And there are people now that are coming in that are trying to educate the people who still have their land but are being coerced into trying to sell it, you know, because you're coming to people who might not have a lot of money because of so many, you know, atrocities, economics being one of them, and thinking, okay, well, this man is going to give me $50,000, but your land is worth $1 million, or essentially $1 billion over a number of years if developed a certain way. But I am for reparations. I don't know. This might be controversial to say, but I don't know if it's for Black Seminoles necessarily, since we were not um, in Texas or in the United States for a period of time. We were in Florida, which was not at that time part of the US, and then we went to Mexico. I love what Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about it. That's one of my favorite articles about it because it's so intelligently written. But I think there needs to be a lot of dialogue about it. Um, I think we as Black people, if I can be in on the conversation as a Black person, I think we should be able to determine what we want to do with the money. I don't know who comes up with the number. I don't know, like, who gets to determine the number that we should be given, but I think Black folks should be able to decide what they want to do with that money. So, yeah,
yeah.
reparations, I think, um, yeah, it's a lot. It's the idea of being compensated, but historically, the US has compensated people that they felt that they had done wrong.
That's right.
So the Japanese um, is one example. So it's not like it can't happen or hasn't happened. There's been a precedent set, but it's such a big conversation. And then how do you classify someone who was enslaved? You know,
So for Black Seminole, you said that you don't think that they would actually be a part of that conversation. Can you
well,
explain?
let me, because we would have been enslaved as Gullahs, right? But I
That's
guess the question would be, is there a certain time that you should have been enslaved in order to receive reparations?
right.
You know? Um, so I think that is part of the conversation. Yeah, there are so many questions to all of this. That's why it's such a difficult and controversial topic, because you could say, well, my family had can prove that they were enslaved for 100 years as opposed to a family that was not enslaved that long. Is that 100-year family entitled to more money? So,
That's a good question. Like you said, that's a very good question. And I think that's where they are hitting some heavy roadblocks with slavery reparations. I do know that
mhm.
California, they're making strides
Yeah,
reparations,
California is, yeah.
but right now the reparation claim is the number that they came up with so far is only for housing discrimination. So
Mm,
not really on slavery as of yet.
yeah.
And like you said, it's going to be hard because then you have to determine, was your family even enslaved?
Mhm.
Because some people were, families were not. Like I had family members that were free, and I have family members that were enslaved.
Yeah.
Um, that's that's a part of history once again that we're not taught about. We're not taught about what were the free people of color doing at this time period. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that
But they
is an important.
don't, that's a, like I said, it's a part of history no one talks about. So um I even told people, because I know that New York is also starting their reparation
Mhm.
committee to start studying reparations as well. But even with New York reparations, I'm sitting here saying, well, most of New York's slave history was underneath the British Crown, not the
Yes,
not the USA, right?
exactly. So is that a technicality, you know?
Right. See, so where does it stop? Because now New York's history, it's not going to be the same, or not going to look like Mississippi's history. You know what I'm
You're
saying? It's
so right. Yeah.
old colonial history, and I know, like for my family and me tracing my roots and stuff here, yeah, it's a lot of our history is like pre 1780s.
Exactly.
So
And
yeah.
how do we qualify and
Mhm.
quantify, you know, who deserves what? I mean, even if you were free, it wasn't like you could move like a free person, like a white person. There were, you know, yeah, it's a big discussion.
Right.
It would be great if there were to be some outcome, but I feel like, yeah, I don't know, reparations, it's a yeah.
Yeah,
Have you read Ta-Nehisi Coates' article about it?
I wonder if I have.
Yeah, it
'Cause
was in The Atlantic. I think it's available online. I'll send you the link for it because I believe you can just read it without, there's no paywall or anything. But
okay,
yeah,
I've read quite a few articles on reparations, and I'm
yeah.
right. I've actually spoken to some of the people that have worked on reparations boards.
Wow.
They're kind of like no, I would say they're probably like on your wave a little bit, where it's like for people who were Indians, your repair will go through something else. It will go through the
Mhm.
I've heard
I
people
mean,
speak.
but look at what's going on now with the Muskogee Creeks. They are literally suing. So, um, yeah,
They're suing the United States.
no, they're suing the Creeks for to
Yeah.
be re-enlisted as freedmen.
The Freedmen, yes.
Yeah.
See, that was something else that I was a part of this summer.
Uh-huh.
A hearing for the five civilized tribes freedmen, and Max.
Oh, I think I heard about that. Okay.
Yeah, and
So
Maxine.
you attended.
I attended. I went. I was there in
I saw
person.
pictures on Facebook. Wow,
Yeah,
so cool. Okay.
yeah, I went, and to be honest with you about that situation, it wasn't really a good hearing. And
Mm,
I'll tell you why is because even the senators, and even they were like asking the tribes, like, what is the estimate numbers that you have on your freedmen? And a lot of them was
mhm.
okay. They were asking the tribes, well, how many people have been trying to enroll? Um, a lot of the tribes said they don't know.
They were ignorant on purpose, you think? Or
It's like I do feel like sometimes I do feel like, because I'm still filling it out. You know
mhm.
what the political standing is. What
Yeah.
them their freedmen. I'm still trying to figure this out. But if I
Mhm.
educated guess of what I've been observing lately, it does feel like it's willful ignorance,
Wow.
because um, if you think about it, um, if somebody has an ancestor on the rolls, right? That one ancestor probably has about 100 plus descendants, right?
Exactly.
And see,
Exactly.
this is where it's tripping them up because there's this game with the roles where you have to be on those Spinal Dallas roles.
Yes, but
In
the
roles,
roles were created by white agents who were not part of the tribes, were not part of the communities. They just came in and said, "Oh, you look like what I think an Indian should look like." Literally, an Indian, not Native American. "Oh, you're too dark."
right?
But, "Oh, y'all are cousins, but no, you're going on the roll, you're not." Or if you do, I'm gonna put Freedman by your name. And we accepted this Dawes roll as our governing document. And so
Mhm.
now, all this time later, it's so messed up because the origins of it were messed up.
Right. And they don't
So,
tell you that not everybody left on the Trail of Tears.
yeah,
There were people that stayed behind, on the eastern seaboard. They didn't
yeah,
to Oklahoma. So, like I said, it's really such a big mess because families are trying to figure out, well, what did happen?
exactly.
They're assimilated. Maybe things didn't turn out well. Now that we have
Hmm.
as United States citizens, we want
Yeah,
to understand what did happen to the tribes when y'all did migrate. What happened
exactly.
when we migrated? Because some of them, the people who did not go on the Trail of Tears and they stayed behind, some of them just migrated north. Right?
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah. And
another
that's why you have all the, well, there were already tribes along the eastern seaboard, but yeah. One thing that I will say is that where we're located in Texas and Mexico is very different from Oklahoma. I feel like I haven't studied Oklahoma as much as I need to. That's what I want to focus on next because they're a hotbed. You
oh yeah.
know,
Hmm.
the Black Seminoles there, the Black Muskogees there are fighting to be accepted
Yes.
by the larger Seminole Nation and Seminole and Creek Nation. And where I live in Brackett, we didn't have to deal with that. So I don't know what it's like to be shunned in that
Exactly.
way. Um, yeah, because
Uh,
we,
that here too in the north. We have that
yeah,
here. We don't necessarily have I'll say as organized a little bit
yeah,
as the
yeah.
as things like that, but you could probably say there is probably some gatekeeping going on
Oh,
where
definitely.
there were families that did migrate from areas, and when
Hmm.
they migrated after they left, roles were created.
Oh,
So
wow.
think about that. Like think about if your family was living in, like, let's say New Haven, Connecticut, and
Hmm.
you the tribe that was there. Okay, well, if you relocated because maybe there was some type of incoming war, or there was talks of
Yeah.
invade your land and take it because they wanted to create what we now call New Haven, right? If
Hmm.
you and then the remaining tribal members created roles, where does that leave you now?
They'll
And it,
forget about you conveniently.
right?
Yeah. Such great questions. But yeah, we um did not have a larger Native American tribe to sort of contrast to compare ourselves to. That happens in Oklahoma. And I just, especially recent history shows that it's been so difficult.
Oh yeah.
People that have grown up around, probably went to school with, trying to deny you, even though you've gone through the trenches with them. So it's a completely different situation there that, yeah, I,
But but do you feel that, because let's just say this, like your father's from the Congo, right?
mhm,
Your father, he's a tribal man, right?
yeah.
Okay. When he goes home to his tribe, do
Mhm.
they because he lives up,
No,
right?
no, not at all. They want him to come home,
Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if, let's just say hypothetically, let's say if your African roots came from, let's say, like four centuries ago,
mhm,
and you went to the same tribe, let's say your dad's from, let's say
mhm,
you got same roots, right, on that side.
yeah.
um do you think they would turn you away if you came back?
No, there was literally an example of that when we were in Beaufort. There's a beautiful DVD about a woman returning Her 7 times great grandmother was stolen as a 10-year-old in 1750.
Wow.
And they had like, and I might be wrong about this, but I think each one of her descendants had one child. So at any time, their family line of succession could have been broken. And by 2005, she went back, and her name is Tomalin, but they were calling her the name of her great 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 grandma, which was Priscilla, because she had come home,
Oh, wow.
and they
So
had been waiting for her.
think about how beautiful that is. Like,
Yeah, no, that you're so right.
apart, but somehow, some way in the United States, though.
We don't want nobody to come back. We're kicking people out. We're kicking family out. So I don't know what
You,
it is. I think it's a scarcity mindset. I think
mm,
it's a scarcity mindset because um what's happening with the Creeks, I think, is money motivated, right?
mm,
I'm sure same thing with the Seminoles is
right.
money motivated. There's money on the table, and they don't want to split the pie
Mm.
2,000 times. If we get rid of 500 people, it's 1,500. We get more.
And you know
So,
what I do? If you nick the problem in the bud early, it
mhm,
won't grow. And what I mean by that is going back to my point about what I said about the roles. Is
mhm,
that one ancestor,
with 100 descendants.
your descendants now, right? So
Mhm,
even though there's only, let's say hypothetically, there's only 100 freedmen that's trying to get into
yeah,
Seminole, not Seminole, let's just say Chickasaw, right?
yeah,
There's 100 freedmen that's trying to get inside there. But guess what? That's only 100. Because really and technically, there's about 30,000 more descendants out there.
yes, their
You're
kids, their kids, yeah.
exactly. You're lucky is only just 100 that's coming to return, right?
Mhm,
But I do think that there's a more of a political game to keep people to just identify
away.
Black and be away.
Mhm,
Because once you really start to play the ancestral number game,
mhm,
I start realizing, oh snap, this one tribe may have 1 million other descendants out there.
yes,
And if they all 1 million return or try to return, how do we handle this number now? So I just
exactly.
that it's about a control aspect, a
Yeah,
money
because
aspect,
how many Native American groups are there? The Cherokee are the biggest,
right?
you know?
Hmm.
Everything else is thousands of people, you
Right.
know? It's all very small numbers.
Right.
Yeah, could you imagine 1 million strong, 2 million strong of every one of the 5 civilized tribes?
And this
So,
people are getting nervous a little bit.
oh
You know,
yeah,
starting to talk more and more about being prideful of this part of our lineage. It's because we're saying, listen, we shouldn't have to hide this. We shouldn't have to
no,
it. But the problem is that is in America, everything is very political. Everything's political.
yeah, yeah,
I even had to talk to my one of my best friends. She comes from the Garifuna people.
yeah,
And and they have their own mixture and they have indigenous
yes.
well.
They're Maroons, yeah.
And I asked her, I said, do you have to do paperwork to prove that you're Garifuna? Or have you say Garifuna? I know it's two ways to say
Yeah.
it. And she said, no, we don't know. We're just families. Like we just know.
Yeah, that's kind of like with us. We know everybody.
But
Um,
here it's very political. People will ask you, where's your paperwork? And you're like,
yeah, that's why I say it's so different between, how I grew up in Texas and Mexico and Oklahoma, you know? Um, yeah, it's a whole different experience.
experience and it's very political and it becomes since it's so political and it's so hostile we have these unnecessary debates we have
Hmm.
very I'll say even sometimes a little bit of violence that
Oh
starts
gosh.
because it's like you are trying so hard to keep certain individuals away and sometimes it's not just because they're Black. Like I've actually spoken to people from Mexico
Hmm.
have they know their indigenous connection they may have there, right?
Yes.
But they're not in their tribe, right? And because they're not in their tribe, honestly, they don't even know how to go about understanding what it means to be in their tribe. So it's not an anecdotal thing that deals with just Black people or darker skinned people, it's
Mm-hmm.
in other parts of the
Oh
Americas where
yeah.
people are still being denied indigenous roots. They have to show and prove it. And a lot of times they're saying, well, I don't even know how to access these records because
Yeah.
if you're dealing with Mexico, you're dealing with the Spaniards and their records.
Yes. Yeah. And
Right.
even then, I'm sure it's still hostile. You're not welcomed with open arms. And,
Right.
that's so sad. And I love the analogy that you used about Africa. That just made it so crystal clear. Yeah, I've never heard of anyone who returns to Africa and didn't feel welcomed.
Right.
So,
But
yeah.
here, born and raised here, a
And
lot of,
every door is closed in your face.
I mean, just and you and you probably live, your family has lived in the same location as your tribe, because I know, like, for me in New York, we don't even live that far away from, we didn't move that far
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
lands. And even though I will say that in New York though,
Mhm.
it's inclusive. So
Yes.
you're gonna see a lot of people that look like me, look like you,
Yeah.
and we can openly be indigenous and be proud of who we are. Now, I know that in other parts of the country, that's not the case. It can get very colorist, very racial, and they
Yeah.
feel wanted or make you feel that, let's say, just because you have the mixed lineage, don't mean that you can come be an Indian or come be a native or come to be indigenous with us. And
Exactly.
I've seen these things. Trust me, I've had people even get in my inbox and my DMs and say really, 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 really nasty things, all because they see someone that looks like moi, and
Yeah. And they
are
don't understand it.
no, they don't
Yeah.
understand, don't want to understand it sometimes too.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
we'll move past that. We talked about a little bit of Seminole history, and like I said, I want to encourage more people that if you are Seminole, you do have Seminole ancestry. I am going to be sending them to Windy. I
Yes.
I want them.
Please contact us.
I want.
What I will say is during COVID, we received so many emails. I think COVID was, of course, it was life changing for the whole world. But we would receive so many emails from people, and I realized people are searching
Oh yes.
for themselves. And if COVID did nothing else, it forced people to kind of sit down and say, who am I? What is the
Mhm.
meaning of this? Where do I come from? So, yeah, we had an influx of people coming in saying, I think I might be Black Seminole. How do I find more information? So please, yeah,
Wow.
I'd like that to continue. So yeah, should I say like where to find us and stuff?
Yeah, definitely tell
Okay.
us. But before you get to that part,
Yes.
I want to I want to talk about that real quick, a little bit more in
Mm.
depth about the COVID situation, because to
Yeah.
be honest, I noticed that too. One of the
Good.
platforms that I got on during COVID was it was called Clubhouse. You ever heard of Clubhouse?
I've heard of Clubhouse. I've never used it though. I had to get an invite to get in, but yeah, I've never been on
Yeah.
it since.
So I started using Clubhouse during the
Uh-huh.
pandemic, and I was dealing with other topics, other current event topics, other
Hmm.
science, AI topics, and tech things like.
Hmm.
And I did stumble across a growing, emerging American Indian community or Native
Yeah.
community, and I was like wondering, okay, I've never
Yeah.
seen people that look like moi talk
Yes.
about that connection, and then it was so many more people that wanted to know more about that connection, right?
Exactly.
So, like you said, even with your business, you noticed that there was an uptick
Oh,
of people
totally.
wanting to
Yeah.
know. And then even for me, I noticed that on different social media apps, especially Clubhouse, there were more and more people who were saying, listen, this is what I am, this is what I heard.
Hmm.
And when I was a little girl, my grandma, she told me that she had Cherokee ancestry. So I
Hmm.
knew that. But for me, what did it mean to be a Cherokee? Because I grew up Black, so
Yeah.
what that even look like? I know she looks like it. I know
Uh-huh.
her. She doesn't look like other types of Black people that's in this country. I get it.
Hmm.
But even for her, because she grew up in the city in
Yeah.
Brooklyn, New York. So, you grew up in a lifestyle, but it's not necessarily the indigenous lifestyle. So what
Yeah,
does
you
it,
have to adapt.
right? You have to adapt to a city lifestyle. And it's like,
Hmm.
now, what does it even mean to be indigenous? How do I even act? How do I even move? So, I definitely see more people wanting to know, like literally
Yeah.
I posted the flyer of our interview, and
Uh-huh.
like some guy commented, and he was like, "I want to know more about my Seminole roots." And I'm like,
Well, I hope he contacts us because, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this was a paradigm shift, and I think number one, what we're seeing is you do not have to look like what people expect an indigenous person to look like to be indigenous.
right,
I think something else within our community is we are it's internal. It's an internal knowing. There's a quiet confidence that we all have because nobody can tell us who we are. You know, nobody can come to us and say, you're not Black Seminole, because we know for sure that at least for 170 years, we've definitely been here. Like, you know we came from Mexico. We might not trace all the way back to Oklahoma, but we know for sure. So there's, just that knowing. And I feel like if other people can just get that, knowing, even just finding one relative, one little piece of a puzzle is important. And I feel like that's what COVID did, was make people go out and search, you know? And family is so important. The family you are born into, the family you create. So, you
and I
know,
say also what also helped during this pandemic was people wanting to know, and more genealogy records being pushed out.
yes, yeah, because I think we are generating our own genealogy records like on ancestry.com. It's all user generated. So that's really important too. And people, I think, and I think my eyes have gotten better at reading, the handwriting from like the 1800s. I think you really do have to sit with it and
Yeah,
learn how they wrote back then. So I feel like just repetition, the more you work with something, the easier it's going to get to identify. So yeah, I think I'm pretty good at reading census records now,
oh
as
yeah.
opposed to I was before when I was like, what is this?
I actually,
So,
because my grandmother, she's 92 years old.
oh,
Right?
amazing.
Her script is just like those records.
When people would actually write, yeah.
Yeah, yes. My mom too. My mom, she has like
Yeah.
my mom has like beautiful penmanship. Um,
Oh,
and that's one of the things she used to like preach to me, like you need to work on your penmanship, work on your penmanship.
yes, it's so important. Even
You
now,
know,
it still is.
do you hear people like pushing kids to work on their penmanship anymore? Like,
No, I don't.
or no,
I
I
don't.
art. That was an art to have really good penmanship. So
Yes.
my mom was always big on me. So like even like now when I'm right, people are like, "Oh, I love your script. I love how you write."
Oh,
And then
see?
I'm like, "Hey, I had no choice. I grew up around women that all they did was write script. All
Wow.
they script. So
That's
now that
beautiful.
exactly, and now that I'm reading genealogy records as well and different things, it's like
You
it's
can see.
funny. And I said this to a couple people. I said, it's
Uh,
funny that in about 40 years, 40, 50 years,
mhm.
reading script is going to be a skill
Oh gosh.
because people are so far removed from it that it's
Yeah.
like you're decoding.
Yes. I think you're right. I could totally see like someone getting a degree in like, American handwriting circa 18.
Yeah, I
I've
never,
I've never thought it. That's amazing. Yeah, I think that could be a
yeah,
thing. Yeah.
they don't teach the children how to write script anymore, and
No.
elders who do write that type of way, they're unfortunately they're leaving the planet and leaving Earth.
Yeah.
So it's like like it's going to become a time where this is going to be a skill. It's going to be a trade.
A highly profitable skill. Yeah.
How to write script, how to read.
Yes.
You need to know how to read your history, and a lot of our records are written in that particular pen.
Yes.
So to sum up before we're going to close out,
Mhm.
um, how does it work? Like so you because we went through all this information, we got a little bit in your
Mhm.
business. But when you were trying to go to the cemetery, or when you want
Yes.
to know about your Black Seminole roots or anything about your story, how does it work with your association and them
Mhm.
trying to tie in the pieces?
Well, what we do is if someone contacts me, what I will do is just go through our muster rolls. We're not very deep with it.
Okay.
Um, but if people give us certain names, like someone wrote to us and said, I'm a bull legs. And
Mm.
have you ever heard that name before? Bull legs? So I was like, oh, you're definitely a Black Seminole. I just need to figure out where.
Right.
So, if you give me a last name, I could probably point you in the direction of one of your relatives so that y'all can then converse and figure out what's going on. But what I would tell people is talk to your family, and if you can record it, especially your elders, just start asking questions because people want to talk. You just haven't asked them yet. That's what I've learned. They're
Mhm.
just waiting for you to go start the conversation so they can tell you everything. So you don't have to, go very far. Just get your phone and start recording your family history. And then from there, you have the oral part. Then if you live where your family has been based, you can go look at records at your local tax assessor's office or the courthouse and things like that to back up whatever was in the oral history that you just learned. And then from there, you can reach out to an association like ours. We're not in the genealogy business, but we have so many people who are doing their genealogy that they can say, oh yes, that name sounds familiar, I can help you plug in this information. So yeah, anybody who is trying to do their genealogy, I think it's a beautiful thing. It might not be the easiest thing now, but for generations to come, they will thank you for
Oh,
putting that family history together for them.
yes, because I'm not gonna lie, like I love when I see families, um, they sometimes have like a collage on their wall,
Yes.
ancestors and like the different achievements they did throughout the year
Yes.
from the 1800s to the 1700s, and I'm like, wow, and these are Black families that are able to.
Yeah.
This is my third great grandma right here, and she lived in this part of Maryland and XYZ. And you're like, wow, like,
Wow.
no, I think it's awesome. It's a blessing to do that, and we have the power to do it right now. So
Yes.
I really did
Oh,
enjoy.
and I'm sorry, one more other thing. Read and just read. Read everything that you can. You never know. You might get a tidbit from just reading something that can take you on
A trip,
I,
right?
I was going to say a wild goose chase, but a
I,
good goose chase, if that's, yeah.
and, and I appreciate that. What's funny? This is one last little tip.
Mhm.
Um, my grandmother, her nickname in her neighborhood used to be Cimarron,
Are you
and
serious?
I mean, I kid you not. She actually named
Wow.
my her middle name is Cimarron because
Oh,
that name to my little cousin. But
yeah.
I asked her recently. I said, "Grandma, why they was calling you Cimarron?" And she was like,
Mhm.
"I don't even know." I said, "Do you even know what a Cimarron is?" And she was like, "No." She was like, "People in the neighborhood used to call me that." And I'm like,
Wow.
so I had to like really educate her, and I also
Yeah.
listened of what Cimarrons were. So it was, like these little, like you will find your family had little tidbits
They
along
left you breadcrumbs.
little breadcrumbs, right? And even
Yeah.
why they were doing something or passing something on, because she wanted to make sure that my little cousin had that name. Like
Yeah. It was important to her.
it was important to her, right? And I was like, Grandma, what
But
are you like?
why? She couldn't tell you why, but she knew. That's amazing.
But she knew. And then once I knew everything about my history and I knew everything about, all my studying, my research and everything,
Mhm.
I said, it makes sense why you have that name. It makes sense why you wanted to pass it on, even if you didn't understand why you were passing it on. It just
Yeah.
started starting to make sense. And, we definitely have to do our part and our generation to make sure that we're keeping those breadcrumbs alive. We
Oh,
go,
yeah. Yeah, I always say, well, really my aunt,
Mhm.
I feel like I've gotten it from her.
Right,
I was talking about Miss Charles Emily Wilson. She was actually a teacher and she educated just about a whole generation of
right,
everybody from Brackett. And she was the founder of our association. So without her, we wouldn't have this association. And
right.
my aunt says, I'm doing this to make her proud. And she's been gone since 2006.
Wow.
And I definitely feel that, you know, we're compelled to
Mhm.
keep this going because we don't want to let her down and everybody else. I don't want to let my grandparents down, you
Exactly.
know. So yeah, it's hard to explain to people who don't understand, but I know you understand, you know?
Well, I think you know what I've noticed and what I try to do. I lead by example. So
Mhm.
for people in my family that
Yeah.
also not quite understand what I'm doing, I make
Mhm.
by example to where you're going to see me attend events. You're going to see me mingling, meeting new family members. I
Yeah.
met quite a few family members and like new ones.
Wow.
Like, yeah,
Mhm.
we're related through this line and that line and that line. And and doing what I'm doing right now is
Mhm.
showing people that there is a community. There these things that these type of people do exist, and
Mhm.
we do like to support each other,
Yes,
and
definitely.
we have to support each other. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We're only stronger together than we are apart because, like I said,
Yes.
history what can easily tie into another tribal's history, which ties into another tribal's history, ties to another tribal history.
Yeah.
And if we all keep our different viewpoints together, we make one big American story.
Oh, yeah. Because this is the story of how this country came to be, and, you know, we're
Right.
definitely a part of it. Yeah, so I have to thank Lonnie Harrington for introducing us.
Let me tell you, let me give a shout out to Lonnie because Lonnie he's like an angel for me. Because I'm telling
Yes.
you, like from my cousin, I met one of my cousins who's a chief of a tribe.
Wow.
Um, even there was another Seminole, I think his name is Jason.
Jason.
Jason,
Hmm.
or
Where
maybe
does he live?
I don't know, but I met him in New York. I met him in
Oh,
Power.
wow. Okay.
But he's a Seminole and he has Miccosukee roots as well.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah, and I've got a little interview with him as well before.
Very cool.
So yeah, Lonnie, shout out to Lonnie because
Yes,
he shows me information all the time. He's like, here, talk to this person. Here, this
I
person, this.
know. Just very casually. He knows so much and he's so cool with it.
Yeah, I definitely admire Lonnie, and it's funny because I have a picture of him that I saw on Pinterest,
What?
and
Oh,
I
wow.
never even seen him this whole time. I'm like, oh, that was you in that picture. Like, oh, that was you.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a picture of like him sitting down and some lady I think next to
Hmm.
him.
Okay. That is
It's
so
it's a
cool.
very it's very popular.
Okay.
Never knew it was him this whole time. I'm like, oh, that's you in that picture. It's
Wow. Now I'm gonna go on Pinterest and look for it. So,
right. I
wow.
probably post it in this video so you'll see what I'm talking about.
Very cool. Okay.
Before we get out of here, once again, let me get your information. Where can they contact the cemetery? Where can they contact
Okay.
you? Where do we go from here so that people can have the resources they need?
Okay, great. So if you want to contact the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association, you can check us out on our website, which is Seminole Cemetery Association.com. You can always email us at Seminole Cemetery Assoc, ASSOC at gmail.com. We have a Facebook page, which is our name, Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery Association. We respond very quickly if you message us there. I think social media is probably the best place to contact us. Definitely on Facebook. That's our most popular social media page. So yeah, you can contact us there, and I'm generally the person answering. So
Okay.
yeah, if you just want to say hi, Wendy, I'll be so happy that you know that it's me. So, but yeah, that's our contact info, and yeah, we try to respond as quickly as possible, especially through our Facebook page. And yeah, there are no silly or stupid questions. If you think you have a connection to us, please let us know. I'm always happy to learn about more kinfolk, you know. So yeah, if you have a question, just contact us.
Well, I definitely thank you, and I hope that you guys are going to use this information and resource for your own good. If you have Black Seminole roots, and make sure you check in with us right here on the Belbazour, because I'm going to have more brilliant and inspiring minds, just like Miss Wendy here. Okay,
Um,
and Miss Wendy, one last thing before we go as well.
yes.
What's your personal information as far as
Um,
if you have an IG or something
Yeah,
that
I
people
do. So you can find me on Facebook under my name, Windy Goodloe, spelled Windy. That's the only distinction, Windy instead of Wendy. Last name Goodloe, Goodloe. And same thing on Instagram. I'm an Instagram person, so I'm on Instagram a lot. So yeah, so you can find me there.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Miss Wendy. We're going to go ahead and
Thank you.